Hey everyone, Kelly here from Kelly Chassis Fine Art, and we've got another episode of Creating with Kelly. And this one, I'm going to show you how to use art resin in place of glue to create a beautiful clear finish for your art pendants. So stick around and we'll be following up on all the details. So welcome to my YouTube channel. I am going to cover today how I have used art resin to replace good old glue for these gorgeous pendants. So I wanted to share with you if you've been having trouble with your glue drying and creating little air bubbles in your glass or underneath your glass, or those little silvery flakes, or if your pendant tends to lift and air gets trapped in there. This is a really good way to resolve that issue. So it's a little bit more expensive, but the art resin has the UV protection built in, so you don't have to do that UV spray, but you still do need to spray it first with that Kmart varnish. And I do cover all of that and how to create these pendants and all the supplies in my full online course, and I'll attach the link for that below. But in this particular video, we're just going to go over just the art resin piece of this. So you can see here I have these little bottles. These are wonderful. I picked these up at Hobby Lobby and they have the measurements right on them. And this makes a great little easy way to measure out your art resin in small quantities. So I'm just using an ounce today, 0.5 of the hardener and 0.5 of the resin. And I just have just a little cup, a little 1 ounce cup here that I'm going to mix that into. So I've got those leveled, and again, this is really easy because if you lay those little cups flat down, you can take a look at them and make sure that your resin is equal, because you want to make sure you have equal parts of resin, equal parts of hardener. And you can just eyeball that with the measurements with using these little cups. So I've got the resin in here and I'm just going to stir this up. Now with art resin, you do need to stir it for at least 3 minutes, and you do have a 45-minute work time with this. So this is after 3 minutes. You can see I do have a little bit of air bubbles in there. You can always take a straw, and you can see where I'm just blowing in here, and you can see those bubbles popping. But at this point, you really don't need to worry about it, because once you put the resin in there, we can use a little lighter and get those bubbles to pop. And plus, once it sits for a couple of minutes, a lot of these will just release anyway. So you can see most of those are gone. There's a few in there still, but we don't want to heat this up at this point because I don't want this to get too thin when we add these to our pendants. So you can see here I have the open bezels, and I also have the glass. Now you can choose just to do just the resin on top if you want to make it really light, but I absolutely love the glass on top because it really magnifies what's underneath. So I have, this one is a little cutout that is the tin foil, and we do cover that in the course how I do all these. And I'm just using this old paintbrush here, something that's not real expensive, and I'm just doing a nice little very light coat of the resin just to seal the base of this, and this will help so the air doesn't get trapped in there. Now one thing you're gonna want to do is that when you put this down here, you want to make sure you have that in the direction that you want it, because once this gets set in here, it's a little bit harder to turn. So it's best to try to get it in there in the direction that you want. You will see this one is tin foil, so it's a little bit lighter weight, so it does tend to move a little bit more. And you can see here I'm just kind of dropping the resin right on here. Now you could use a straw or you could use a dropper if it's a little bit easier for you. But I don't use a whole lot of resin for this. You can see that this goes a long way. So I'm very slowly adding it. I don't want to get too much in there because then you have too much overspill when you lay that glass on top. So at this point, I'm going to take just one of those little lighters and we'll pop the bubbles that are in there. You can see how easy that happened. And now you can see where, since the resin's heated up, it has a little bit easier movement here. I'm going to rocking that back and forth. Now, if you want, once it's thinned out, you can take a little brush and just kind of maneuver it over to the edges. Now this will settle, but I'm trying to speed this up. A lot of times I'll do a bunch of these at once, and I will just fill it up with resin and let that resin kind of sit and flatten out, making sure that I have it on a level surface, and then I'll go back and put the glass on top of them all afterward. So I'm going to add just a little bit more resin to this. And you're going to have to play with this so you can kind of see what is too much resin and what is not enough resin. If you don't have enough resin in there, you'll tend to get air bubbles trapped in there, so you don't get a good seal on it. If you get too much, then it's overflowing everywhere and you're doing a major cleanup. So you'll learn how much to put in there. So again, I'm just taking the lighter here and covering the bubbles one more time. Now make sure that your glass is clean before you drop it on there. And I just pop it in, and you can see that resin just kind of squeezes out along the edges. And if you get it just right, you won't have any overflow. And if you do have some, you just can kind of clean that up with a little bit of alcohol. So you can see how quick and easy that is. Now, if you do get a little bit on there, just take you usually want to have gloves on when you're doing this and making sure that you're following all those safety precautions. But for the video here, I just wanted to do this without my gloves. I usually have them on, so make sure you wear yours. Do as I say, not as I do, right? All right, so let's do another one here. This one is with the Yupo paper, regular Yupo, 74-pound weight, and is a little bit thicker. And you will find it takes up a little bit more space than what the foil does or what mineral paper will. You can also use the translucent. You can use pretty much anything. The only thing you don't want to use is paper, because if you use regular paper or prints, you do have to use another process on sealing because the resin will absorb into regular paper. So again, I'm just going to put just a very thin coat layer down here first. And I have done this with some of the thinner materials, like the mineral paper, without putting that coat down, and it has worked. I haven't had any problems with it because I've got a pretty deep size bezel here. Now, if you have a really thin bezel, this may not work for you because you want to make sure that you've got enough room for that resin to attach to your metal. So this is a pretty good size bezel, so it's got some depth to it. So again, I'm just going to drop some of that resin in here, adding it slowly and carefully. And another thing you could do is you take these little bottles. If you wanted to, you could, once you get the resin mixed up, you could always put it in one of these dropper bottles and you could squeeze it out too, which makes it real easy. So there's a good amount, so you can see how far out that's spread. It's almost like about a dime size, I would say. And we're going to go ahead and heat that up again and remove those air bubbles. Be careful not to burn your Yupo paper at this point because that's still out there, uncovered, unprotected. So you don't want to leave that flame on there for too long. And again, I'm just spreading that resin out. You can see where that's running to the edges here. And once you drop the glass on top, it usually will spread that resin right out. And again, I have my little 1-inch glass here, and I'm just going to drop that on. Again, it just kind of pushes any air. Usually, if you get it on there right, just pushes it right out. Now I have a little bit of resin. You can see it's seeping out on the edge here. So I'm going to just take a little bit of alcohol on a cloth here and just wipe that up. Now it's important to get it while it is still wet, because once that resin dries, you will have a little bit of a thicker area there. Sometimes it dries fine and you don't even notice it because it's all clear. But if you get a little bit too much on there, it you sometimes can see it, and then it's really hard to get off of there. Now you can see in this one, I actually have an air bubble in there. See that? So you can see where it's kind of silvery. I tilt it. So it does happen, usually not quite as much as what it does with your regular glue. But all you need to do is just take that glass and just kind of twist it, and the air bubble usually will pop right out. So you can see I have a little bit of resin again that kind of leaked out of there. And I just want to wipe that off. Now your resin, when it hits like 45 minutes, it begins its curing process. So you will find it tends to get a little thicker, but you can still work with it. It just is beginning its process, and you'll know when it's time to stop. And usually I'm mixing up just a small amount anyway, and I use it up before then. But I can usually get about, like I said, about 20 pendants done during one session here if I've got everything already cut out and ready to go. So I will put in the comments down here as well for you folks the links to the art resin. And if you're interested in the whole entire course, don't forget to check that out. I'll leave you a link on here, a sale link for that as well if you want to learn how to do the alcohol ink pendants from start to finish. And I go over all the materials and everything in there for you, where I buy them, and some different options on how to create the backgrounds on those. So again, I'm just scooping that out. And this would be a nice one too if you wanted to leave that without the glass. You could just let that fill it up a little bit more with the resin, and you could just let that dry as is without putting the glass on it if you wanted to. But like I said, I like the glass only because it gives it a nice magnification. But you know, as with anything, it's all preference based. I do these without glass as well. I'll do a lot of I have a resin course as well that I do, and we tint the resin all different colors, and I show you the pour process on that, and that's another class, and I'll put that link down here for you too. And I did want to say too that when you are doing the pendants, these particular pendants are a little tilted. So the bail that's on here, you're going to want to, you can see where I brought those other pendants off to the edge, and just drop the bail off to the side when that's drying so that it keeps it nice and level. So I'm watching that air bubble. I can see it up at the top there. And if you just let it sit, sometimes they'll just go away on their own. It just kind of works its way out to the side there. But I can still just sort of see it up there at the top. So if you just kind of tap it or push on that just a little bit, and that's all you have to do. And you can see where the resin is seeping out just a little bit on the side there again. And just clean that, do a little quick cleanup for that, and you'll be set. So it's a little bit different than the glue. Glue, you always want to make sure you don't push it all out, because then you'll create air bubbles underneath. The resin is pretty thick, so it sets pretty good without having a lot of pressure added to remove those air bubbles. So you can see how quickly I just did 4 of those pendants real fast. Actually, I was taking my time with you, and you can see where one overflowed just a little bit here. So you do want to kind of babysit these, check back, and make sure that you don't have this issue, because it will stick to your board and you will end up with resin on the back side of your pendant, and that's really hard to get off unless you catch it like right as it's starting to cure, where you can kind of peel it off. But these have a little print on the back, so it's really hard to get the resin off. So if you just wipe that up with the alcohol, set that back down, you're good to go. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like and a share, and I would love to hear your comments on here. And if there are some other videos that you would like for me to do, please let me know in the comment sections below. And thanks so much for watching, and please check out some of my other videos while you're here. We have the new course, and I've posted that on here for you as well.